Major funding for Carolina Business Review is provided by Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. And by Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries.
So, what does the recent controversy around the Duke Progress Energy merger and subsequent intrigues have to do with corporate governance? Ostensibly everything, but in reality, maybe not much. We welcome you again to the longest running and the most widely watched program on Carolina business and public policy. And as tempting as it may be for some, our dialogue this time is not about Duke Energy's predicament with the North Carolina Utility Commission or past board members or shareholders, but it's more of a place to begin this week's discussion about the increased level of scrutiny being placed on and expected from boards and directors. We start in just a moment.
Major funding also by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. And by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. This edition of Carolina Business Review was recorded August 10th, 2012. On this week's program, Peter Browning of Peter Browning Partners, Pamela Davies of Queen's University, and Stephen Morrison of Nelson Mullins. Now, Chris William.
Hello, welcome to our program, lady, gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
I don't want to be sensational. We've talked off air about this, but let's start with this issue around Duke and Progress Energy. And I know you're all so excited about wading into this one because we all offline at cocktail parties, we all kind of shake our heads about what is going on there. But, Peter, I want to start with you. Is what is going on at Duke and Progress immediately past the merger now in July? Is this about corporate governance, or is there something else to this? What is this?
Well, it's both. I mean, clearly, it's about, Duke is a publicly traded company. It's owned by the shareholders. So you clearly have issues around governance. It also, but it's a unique set of circumstances because Duke's business is principally that of supplying energy as a monopoly, granted it by the state. So it also has a relationship with the Public Utility Commission to assure that it's providing reliable, low-cost energy. So you've got two sets of issues. But to me, from a governance standpoint, whether it's a publicly traded company or it's a not-for-profit, it's a university, the board can't run the company, the CEO does. And its single most important responsibility, in fact, I wrote a chapter for a book on leadership a couple of years ago, Leadership in the Corner Office, the board's most important responsibility. So the board's single most important responsibility is the CEO. And does it have the right CEO? So I'm not, they're still in the middle of resolving all of this. And let me say this. I know 5 of the board members. I've been on boards with them. I trust their experience, their judgment, their willingness and their ability to raise issues and agree and disagree in a very constructive way. So this thing's still in the middle of being resolved. But it certainly is a governance question when it comes to in terms of who is responsible for running the company. That's the board of directors.
So Pamela, Steve, as we take this a little further, and Peter just alluded to that one of the most important jobs of board is select the CEO, whether it's a for-profit or not for-profit. Pamela, then getting back to a merger and an acquisition, whether it's Duke or not, what is the role of a corporate board during a merger and acquisition?
Well, I think they certainly have to ensure that the combined company will be more valuable than the companies separately. So a lot of attention is paid on synergies and leadership issues. and a lot of time paid to who will ultimately lead the company and the senior team that will evolve out of what is two leadership teams that are being combined. So I think in Duke's case, they believed the merger took a very long time to execute, as you know, and so what they believed to be in the best interest of the company 18 months prior to the actual transition differed than what they believed to be in the best interest of the company as they got closer to that deadline. So, you know, a lot of things evolved during that 18 months that I'm sure impacted their decision, but their responsibility is to do what's in the best interest of the shareholders long term, and obviously they believed that that was to have Jim Rogers leading the company.
So, same question, Steve. What's the role of a board during a merger and acquisition?
Well, you had 17 people who put out both boards, and then the 17 that were the elected members of the new board said this merger is a great deal, and they said that Johnson is the guy to lead the company, and they put 5 guys around Johnson from Progress and said lead the company. They gave him a $10 million pay package, and then within 2 hours of appointing him, electing him at a board meeting as president, they fired him as president and gave him then a $10 million parachute. I think it's very fair to say, hey, what are you guys doing? This doesn't make a whole lot of sense looking from the outside. Looking in, Wall Street Journal and others have said, what is up with this? I mean, you selected the people to lead the company. You selected the merger team that you were going to pull everything together. You selected the leadership and then unselected them in a 10-7 vote, apparently, old Duke versus old Progress. Was it all planned ahead of time? Did you tell the truth to the shareholders when they voted on the merger? Did you tell the truth to the North Carolina Utilities Commission when you told them what was going on? Fair questions, all fair questions, and should be a very great concern to the individual board members. They should pay attention to the criticism, and they should pay attention to being sure that they do what my colleagues here on this panel have said, and that is pay attention. Are you going to better the customer's situation? Are you going to build satisfied customers? And if you build satisfied customers, have you built satisfied employees? If your employee satisfaction is high and your customer satisfaction is high, we know that shareholder value goes up. If you just focus on shareholder value at the beginning and forget about the customers and the employees, you got a problem building shareholder value. So I have a real question as to whether or not Progress employees are going to feel good about this, whether or not this merger is going to come and play at a time when you can adequately integrate the two companies. I think it's a great way to start the debate and have this conversation, Chris.
Yeah. You were going to agree with something.
Well, I was just going to reiterate that the board's responsibility is to select the CEO and select the CEO who can ensure that the customers are served and the employees are integrated and those sort of things. And I think in this case, they made their choice on that. And I would be eager to see Duke Energy get on with the execution, because at the end of the day, that's what it's going to depend on.
Yeah, looking back, and Johnson's out, Rogers is in. Everybody should pull behind Rogers, help him build a great company, and pull this all together.
But I agree with you, Steve, but a lot of hard feelings around this. I guess the question is, and I don't want, I'm sorry, Peter, I don't want to go down this road too far, because I really want to come back to this role of corporate boards. But, how long is this going to go on? How long is there going to be a push and pull with the North Carolina Utility Commissions and Duke and all these other things?
Well, the integration of companies is extremely complex. A lot of companies
Especially
fail,
a regulated company.
Especially a regulated company. This is almost like merging two government entities, if you will, two regulated monopolies. And this is complicated business, and a lot of mergers fail because of the inability of the leadership to integrate the culture. This is certainly a warning flag. There's going to be a lot of work over the next 24 months to integrate, create the synergies, and get this done. On the other hand, if we keep worrying about Johnson's feelings and whether or not the board feels good about all this and all that kind of gossip, it really doesn't move the company forward. So they've got to figure out how to go forward.
Peter.
Well, I will have 2 comments, but just to build on that, I mean, it's in all our best interest, the Public Utility Commission, all of us as individuals, and the shareholders, to make this work, and it will, because we need reliable, cost-efficient energy,
Absolutely.
electricity. This will happen. It will come together. It's not optional. But let me just say, let's get back to this question. What is the role of the board in acquisitions? The ultimate fiduciary of a company is the board of directors. One of its critical roles is working with the CEO and their team around acquisitions. Some of the biggest risks, and we got plenty of examples here in town, but some of the biggest risks, I think, right at the very top that corporations take is making acquisitions.
Absolutely.
And it fails for three reasons. You got the wrong strategic fit, you paid too much, or Steve was referring, you didn't integrate them well. But and it'll happen again. What do they say? 70–80% of acquisitions fail. We don't have any option here. This has got to work because it's all in all of our best interest, the shareholders and the, all of us as individuals in the state. So, but that is out front the single biggest risk that most companies take is making acquisitions.
How do you know? How does a board know? Well, I mean, is there some matrix? Is there some formula that a board has? And you're smiling at this. But how does a board know when it's time for a CEO change? If you were at Wachovia, you went through that very painful process of being on that board when Ken Thompson had been removed. How do you know? And not to ask you any backroom board dealings, Peter, but how do you know when a CEO needs to be taken out of the game? Is it a year? Is it a 2 years?
Well, I said the board, in addition to the fiduciary dotting the I's, crossing the T's, has three principal responsibilities. Does it have the right CEO? Does it have the right succession plan, both short and long term? Does it have the right strategies of being implemented well? Let's talk about that first. There are a number of ways that a board goes about assuring that it has the right CEO. And we could spend a better part of the show talking about that. But let me just go through several. Number one is how, in fact, is the CEO leading the company. And you measure that, obviously, from what's happening in the stock market. And trust me, you're never as good as your numbers. You're never as bad. A rising tide lifts all boats. Ken Thompson had been Banker of the Year for the Banking Magazine 2 years before. So that's one. You're talking with employees. You're having an opportunity to do an annual assessment. The board of directors meets in executive session, has an opportunity to review and discuss the company. The kinds of selections the individual makes, the CEO, when he's picking people on his team. So there are a number of data points that go on. In fact, I was just looking at this the other day, that the shelf life of CEOs is getting shorter and shorter. So if you look from 92 to 2005, it was 7 years. You look from 98 to today, it's 6 years. I can guarantee you it was 8 years or more back in the 80s. And we could spend, again, quite a bit of time talking about, well, Yahoo, HP. I mean, this goes on all the time.
Well, and let me stop you right there for a second. And it's funny you should say that about the shelf life of CEOs getting shorter and shorter when the multiples of a CEO's pay has gotten wider and wider from the average employee. Is there some relation to that when you go through the comp discussions?
Well, I think that is one of the major concerns that shareholders have and the public at large has. It is the growing gap between the CEO's compensation
It's
and
the most
that of
obvious,
an average. And at the top of the organization, you're paying for talent what it takes to get talent. And my concern sometimes is that you're setting those salaries based on peer competitors, and it all just kind of goes up and up. My concern is the pay and performance relationship. So if you're looking to set CEO compensation in comparison to 10 benchmark companies, what is that company's performance relative to those 10 benchmark companies? So best practices in terms of compensation would say that the level of pay is relative to the level of performance in the industry in which you compete. And that's what I think boards have to be more and more accountable to. We also have to be very sensitive to the fallout. And you mentioned Mark Hurd and that instance and the huge severance package that was paid there. And people can sit around and second guess that all day, but the board probably failed when they, structured the original contract. So whether he was fired with cause or without cause, determine the severance package. So there's a lot. You've really got to be thinking ahead. You've got to be way ahead of the game on compensation.
Chris, I think that your boards are frequently lulled into a sleep on evaluating the CEO. And they evaluate CEOs very much on this, how you doing in the market, how you doing versus your peers. And they end up paying for pulse instead of paying for performance. And what that means is that they pay to be alive at a particular point in time when the market's going up. And that really is not a good way to pay a CEO. Now, Peter put his hands on exactly how you should pay a CEO, and that is, how are you doing with inspiring your employees and your leadership and building your team around you? We know every study that's ever been done by the University of Michigan and Harvard, where I went to school, you have employee satisfaction is the greatest predictor of customer satisfaction. Why? Because employees are satisfied when they can make and keep promises. Customer satisfaction is the greatest predictor of shareholder value. Why? Because when you make and keep promises to customers, the customers come back for more. And so what we need to do with CEOs and what boards need to really focus on is how satisfied are those employees? How satisfied is the leadership around that CEO? What are people telling you about that CEO? And the boardroom is really a listening room. It's where you go to listen carefully to what the people on the ground who run the company already know. If you listen to that, you'll comp the CEO right, you'll compensate the shareholders properly.
I want to come back to something you said with Peter. Before we do that, next week on this program, he's the University of North Carolina System President Tom Ross. He was here not long ago. He'll be here next week to talk about not just all things UNC, but certainly all things around education and how important it is, as well as what is going on at the UNC system. Peter, both Pamela and Steve make a good point about this CEO comp, and I know you've got particular opinions on that. So how do you measure how a CEO inspires? How do you do that one? I mean, certainly you can look at metrics with stock price, you can look at return on investment, you can look at some of those harder science, but how do you know you got the right guy or gal really?
Well, let me go back to what I was talking about before, and that's what boards get paid for. Mm-hmm. And it is determining whether you have the right CEO. And again, you're never quite as good as your numbers, you're never quite as bad. And it is a multifaceted process. It involves the number of things that I mentioned, and I do believe in the benefit, actually, of a good assessment process. It's only been required since '02. Mm-hmm. Boards of directors have only been required to meet in executive sessions since '02. I think that's one of the biggest single changes that came out of the New York Stock Exchange listing requirements.
Not Sarbanes-Oxley.
No, Sarbanes-Oxley had to do with the audit committee. The New York Stock Exchange listing requirements required a majority of independent directors, 3 committees, only independent directors, annual assessment of the board, annual assessment of the committees, annual assessment of the CEO. But to me, the single biggest change was it required the board to meet an independent session, alone, without the CEO. And you can't imagine, that was one of the single largest changes that took place in terms of the way boards functioned and worked. There have been a number of other things, but that to me alone. But let me just talk about pay. Pay has been in the forefront since the late 80s. Greif Crystal used to complain about the growth of pay, and it was paid in cash, actually. But it's a question you ask, what if, how would I be paid if I was looking for a job? Well, trust me, if you started looking, if they were trying to recruit you in the early 80s for a job as a CEO, you would have asked for, what's my severance, what's the change of control? Significant changes started taking place in, we'll call it Schumpeter's creative destruction in our industrial base as we were going from a manufacturing economy to a service economy. That's when the search business started. And so CEO pay, another factor, was the first time they added long-term incentive. That was never part of pay until the early 80s. And there, we could spend a day, again, all talking about that. So it suddenly started to change dramatically as you got into the late 80s and the early 90s, and then we paid in stock options. The stock market took off, and CEO pay increased dramatically, really peaking in terms of the ratio back in 2000. So.
Okay, so if we're talking about how a board knows they have the right person in the seat, the right CEO seat, how do you know you have the right board person in the seat? What are the checks and balances? If you got Pamela, if you've got a bad board member that you serve with, and you go, oh, they don't get it, they're not doing their work, they don't really bring value to the table.
Yeah, we address that pretty proactively in the boards I'm on. I've been on boards where we have, not nominated people for to stand for re-election for the board. There is a very formal process of board evaluation in both of the corporate boards I sit on today. I will tell you, I've served on corporate boards for 12 years at least, and I have watched that evolution of more systematic and formal processes of evaluation for both individual board members, committee performance, board performance, and CEO performance. So I think it's all good. I think it's become much more systematic and formal, and the result is a very positive one. So whether it was the listing requirements or Sarbanes-Oxley or Dodd-Frank, all of those things have served to make board processes more effective.
Is it harder getting quality people to consider being
Yes.
a director?
There's no question about that. The liability exposure is
Even
huge.
if it's covered by insurance, even
And
if
the
it's
time
covered by...
commitment, the time commitment is much greater today.
You talked about preparation and how people need to be prepared. And in today's world, if you're going to a quarterly board meeting plus at least one long-term strategy meeting plus maybe one succession planning meeting, it's 6 a year, you're prepared for a full day and a half of committee meetings and board meetings. You pretty much have to do days worth of reading in advance and a lot of work on spreadsheets. So it's a tremendously pressure-packed information gathering piece. You should also be phoning in to your CEO and probably his direct reports on specific items like the CFO, on financial questions that you've got before the meeting. It's all very, very important. And then in today's world, despite all the legal reforms, there are more lawsuits now than there ever have been in the past, and directors are named all of the time. Now, a lot of those are
in a suit.
In a lawsuit as individual directors. And most of the time, those directors walk away from those lawsuits because the law protects them for exercising good business judgment, asking good questions, following the evidence, and taking prompt action. And if they're doing that, they're not going to be found liable. But still, it's not pleasant to be sued and then have to defend yourself, even with the insurance carriers and so forth. So a lot of people don't want the hassle of being on a public company board anymore.
Let me, I get a call one or two a week about individuals who are interested in joining a board. There are plenty of people out there who are interested. The question is finding the right people. It's been more difficult for CEOs because institutional shareholder services will vote against a CEO who's on more than one outside board.
And you were on 5 at one point? 6?
I was on 6, yeah.
Did you get a lot of pressure from institutional shareholders?
Not at that time, no. ISS said if you're not a sitting
not a
CEO,
CEO.
you could be on 6 boards.
He was the dean of my business school.
That's right.
He's my CEO.
Four of those were in Charlotte. I mean, so it made it very easy to travel around. But let me, look.
And it was a day where I think the demands for rigor were less.
Well,
You mean as a board
let me
member?
just,
But
let
look
me-
what
let-
you get
let-
when you get Peter Browning on a board. You get the dean of the business school, extensive chief executive type experience, great capacity with financial statements and financial acumen. That's the kind of board member that you want, and you pretty much have to go hunt those people down because the board member like Peter Browning is extraordinarily valuable as an independent voice sitting on the board. There aren't a whole lot of people like that, and if you're engaged in full-time other, wage-earning activity, it's tough to take those jobs on.
Let me just say the 4
And we have
boards
about
on-
a minute.
Okay, the 4 boards on which I sit, we are recruiting board members now. To Steve's point, Pamela, it takes time, but we have been able to find good board members. You got the former CEO of McDonald's, you got the current chairman CEO of Dollar General, you got the current CEO of VF Corporation. They've all just joined the Lowe's board. And we got the former chairman and CEO of Walgreens. And so they're there. It takes time to get the right individuals.
Not to sound Pollyannish, Peter, but that would seem like that's rare air. I mean, the people you just spoke of, I would guess there's about 2 degrees of separation between some of these people. Wouldn't it be easy to find the quality person?
You'd be interested. There wasn't anyone on our board at the time, but one. I mean, we know. Some of us knew Eric Wiseman. Others did not know those other individuals. Their name came up through the process of investigating what we were looking for. And of course, it's a retail company, so you get that ability of that background and experience to help you when you're sitting on a retail board.
That was a half an hour. Thank you for being on the program and
Wow.
putting yourselves out there for some of this dialogue. We appreciate it. Good to have you here, Steve.
Glad to be with you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Pamela, always nice to see you. Been
Nice
too
to
long.
see you, Chris.
Thank
It
you. Welcome
has.
back. Peter,
Chris,
can I say thank you, sir?
good to see you.
Thank you.
Until next week, I'm Chris Williams. Don't forget, next week, Tom Ross from the University of North Carolina System. And if you have any comments or suggestions, please go to carolinabusinessreview.com and make those. Have a good weekend. Good night.
Good night.
Major funding for Carolina Business Review was provided by the Duke Endowment, a private foundation in Charlotte enriching communities in the Carolinas through higher education, healthcare, rural churches, and children's services. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina. Who's responsible for rising healthcare costs? Join Blue Cross and Blue Shield of North Carolina and many others in a candid discussion at letstalkcost.com. Grant Thornton, an international accounting, tax, and business advisory organization dedicated to serving middle-market companies. Grant Thornton, a passion for the business of accounting. Novant Health, including Presbyterian in Charlotte and Forsyth in Winston-Salem, are affiliate heart hospitals of the Cleveland Clinic, consistently ranked #1 in the nation for heart care. Blue Cross and Blue Shield of South Carolina, proudly serving South Carolinians since 1946. Sunoco, a global manufacturer of consumer and industrial packaging products and provider of packaging services with more than 300 operations in 35 countries. And by viewers like you. Thank you. Promotional consideration provided by Business North Carolina Magazine. For more information, visit carolinabusinessreview.com.